In 2 Kings 5, so you can go ahead to your Old Testament there and turn to that. 2 Kings 5, 1 through 19. 4 years ago, in the height of COVID, we had some desperate people. Some were willing to stay home all the time to protect themselves. Sometimes people kind of got a little ugly to other people because they saw people and germs as a threat. Then there were people who couldn't find toilet paper. You remember that? Because of hoarding. Guilty as charged. But those people were really desperate at times, I'm sure. Well, today we're going to conclude our series on the outside looking in by examining the story of a man who had a serious desperation, a man who was well off and well respected but was not well. So far in this series, we've seen a couple of people who were definitely on the outside looking in. Not a part of God's chosen people. Not under the covenant relationship that He had with them. And we've seen how God worked in them and with them, used them even in powerful ways on behalf of His own people even, and brought them in. Because that's what God's all about. That's why Jesus came and died on the cross, to bring people from the outside looking in. Well, we have the same type of situation here. Pick up with me at verse 1 of 2 Kings chapter 5. Now Naaman, captain of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man with his master and highly respected because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was also a valiant warrior, but he was a leper. Now the Arameans had gone out in bands and had taken captive a little girl from the land of Israel, and she waited on Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "I wish that my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria. Then he would cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went in and told his master, saying, "Thus and thus spoke the girl who is from the land of Israel." Then the king of Aram said, "Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel." He departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 shekels of gold and 10 changes of clothes. He brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, "And now, as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy." When the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his clothes. Good thing Naaman took some extra with him. And said, "Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man is sending word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? But consider now and see how he is seeking a quarrel with me, against me." It happened when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent word to the king, saying, "Why have you torn your clothes? Now let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman came with his horses and his chariots and stood at the doorway of the house of Elisha. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you will be clean." But Naaman was furious, and went away and said, "Behold, I thought he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in a rage. Then his servants came near and spoke to him and said, "My father, had the prophet told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then, when he says to you, 'Wash and be clean'?" So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. When he returned to the man of God with all his company and came and stood before him, he said, "Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel, so please take a present from your servant now." But he said, "As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will take nothing." And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Naaman said, "If not, please let your servant at least be given 2 mules' load of earth. For your servant will no longer offer burnt offering, nor will he sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. In this matter may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship, and there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow myself to the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter." He said to him, "Go in peace." So he departed from him some distance. All right, verse 1 tells us who Naaman was. an important, high-ranking Aramean army captain. Now, Aram was an area in the central part of what we call Syria today, north of Israel. Not really a nation then in and of itself, more of a territory. It was a group of nomadic tribes. It's likely that the one considered the king of Aram would have been the most dominant tribal leader of that time, and was able to kind of bring a bit of unity among them without a lot of governmental formality. At this time, most commentators believe the king was Ben-Hadad II, also known as Hadadezer. It's also important for what we have just read to go on and identify Jehoram, who was the son of Ahab and Jezebel, as the king of Israel, the northern kingdom. At this time, the kingdom was divided. There was Judah to the south and Israel to the north. Jerusalem was the capital of Judah to the south. Samaria was the capital of Israel to the north. The Arameans had been warring with Israel for quite some time, and at this time it's thought they may have been under a peace treaty. Now, Naaman had a lot going for him. We're told here he was a great man with his master. He was highly respected by his men. The third thing we find out about him tells you why. He was a valiant warrior. That always gets the attention of your king and your men. He wasn't somebody who just led his men into battle. He fought, valiantly fought, and had a reputation for that. But the fourth thing we find out about him in verse 1, his very last word, he was a leper, meaning he had a skin disease of some sort. Now, Hebrews called most skin diseases leprosy, even if it wasn't exactly leprosy, but he had some sort of skin disease. Now, if we were in school, go back to your school days if you can handle that. That doesn't trigger you in some way, okay? We might play a game called Which One of These Doesn't Belong with the Others? And which one would that be? The leprosy. Great man with his master, highly respected, valiant warrior, but a leper. It was unusual for someone with this sickness to be accepted in any culture. Impossible in Israel because they'd be considered unclean. They had to stay outside the city. They had to stay in groups. You didn't go around them. You didn't touch them or anything. What this tells me is how skilled Naaman was as a fighter. This problem hounded him. He had a serious desperation to be rid of this problem. He literally had been fighting through the stigma for acceptance and was so good, guys didn't have a problem with it. So he's got this problem. That's when we see a solution recommended. A solution recommended. Verse 2, the Arameans had gone out, bands had taken captive a little girl. The two sides were supposed to be at peace, but they still fought on the border for territorial control, still had some skirmishes, still had some raids going on from time to time. We know the Arameans had an affinity for taking women and children because Ben-Hadad I had even demanded wealth, women, and children from King Ahab in 1 Kings 20. They saw women and children as property they could more easily control. Women became wives or whatever, and children became servants. The girl became the handmaid, this particular girl became the handmaid of Naaman's wife, waiting on her directly. And so one day she says to Naaman's wife, I wish, verse 3, my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, then he would cure him of his leprosy. Again, Samaria being the capital of Israel. Elisha was the prophet of Israel at this time, having succeeded Elijah. God had done great things through Elisha already, and this is where he gets the reputation. I mean, he'd even brought a young man back to life. And so he has this reputation as a great man of God, and the girl had heard of it and shares it with Naaman's wife. Evidently, she's being well treated and feels comfortable enough to share this. Little side note here. Jesus told us to have the faith of a child. This girl believed God would heal Naaman, despite the fact that he was a Gentile and the enemy of God's people, despite all that he had done. If he had been a valiant warrior, he'd probably taken many Israeli lives. But she still offers this. Now, some might call that naive. Jesus called it faith. So Naaman goes to his king. Ben-Hadad, and the king agrees to send a letter to the king of Israel. He thought that much of Naaman and wanted to help him that much. The money and clothes that are sent may have been bestowed by Ben-Hadad, the king, or at least in part, or Naaman probably had decent personal wealth from all the times of plundering and things like that from his battles. The text doesn't really say exactly where it came from. Naaman is about to, though, embark on a dangerous trip. Verse 9 tells us he had warriors traveling with him. He had horses and chariots and men with him because his safety would have been at risk. I mean, Naaman's a marked man. He sets foot in Israel. He's been a valiant warrior. He's a marked man, right? Then you add the fact that he's carrying all this wealth with him, and by the time he got to Jehoram, the king of Israel, he probably breathed a sigh of relief. Made it. Got all the way into Samaria, because Samaria was not a short journey from the border. It was a little ways. So he had to get pretty far into the land. But he gets there, and he gives the letter to the king, and that causes a problem Naaman may not have anticipated, and that is a suspicious response. Go to verse 6. He brought the letter to the king of Israel. Now, as this letter comes to you, behold, I have sent Naaman, this is Ben-Hadad writing, my servant to you, that you may cure him of his leprosy. You may cure him of his leprosy. Well, how do you think the king took that? I'm supposed to cure him of his leprosy. This is why he tears his clothes. He feels like this is not good. We're in a peace agreement, and now Ben-Hadad is trying to find a way to break this treaty and blame me for it, because I'm not going to be able to cure this guy. And so in just agony and despair, he tears his clothes. It was a natural suspicion. When it comes to war and peace, deception's often used to accomplish goals. I think the fact that Jehoram thought this means he himself had probably been prone to do it a time or two himself. Most leaders feel that temptation, and most follow suit and do. So we get the suspicious response. So we've got this desperate man wanting to be healed. He gets this advice to go. He gets this response when he gets there. But then we see a spectacular result. Let's start walking through it, verse 8. This is where we get to the heart of it. Verse 8, it happened when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes. He sent word to the king, saying, why have you torn your clothes? Let him come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. Elisha heard and took interest. Y'all with me this morning? Okay. Now, either God told him directly and gave him instructions that are not recorded in the text, or, like Marvin Gaye, he heard it through the grapevine. I don't know. Either way, Elisha called for Naaman to come to his house. He said, send him here. Clearly, they sent him to come to me. Elisha's not being arrogant. He's like, this is, what God wants me to do. Verse 9, so Naaman came with his horses, his chariots, and stood in the doorway of the house of Elisha. He had an impressive entourage. Verse 10, Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean. Elisha didn't even go outside. Why? Well, multiple reasons. This man's a Gentile for one. He's a leper for another. But he didn't have to. He didn't have to. But what about Naaman, other than the fact that he was a Gentile leper might say that? Well, we get some idea in verse 11. But Naaman was furious and went away and said, behold, I thought he will surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord, his God, and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Naaman's arrogance is on display here. He needs a dose of humility. There is a need to teach Naaman faith in and obedience to Yahweh, because he says on the name of the Lord, his God. He's wanting something from Elisha's God, even though he's not Naaman's God. Why? Because Naaman's God hadn't done anything. Naaman hadn't been able to do anything for Naaman at all, because he's not real. So Elisha doesn't come out. He wants to teach Naaman that God, represented by Elisha, was greater and should be approached with humility and submissiveness, that Yahweh may be unseen, but had messengers who spoke His word of truth, and those words should be followed. Not the messenger followed, but the word should be followed. He says in verse 12, "Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?" So he turned and went away in a rage. How desperate was Naaman? Not desperate enough. He got mad because he felt disrespected. He envisioned a man who would feel honored to meet him, who would be excited to heal him. Elijah was the one Naaman thought was getting a privilege. He also didn't like the method Elisha prescribed. It would be humiliating for him to get in the waters of the Jordan and do such a thing. And I'll be honest with you, at certain times of the year, the Jordan's pretty nasty. It's not the most beautiful piece of water in the world. Pretty muddy a lot of the time. But Naaman was missing the point. It wasn't about the rivers or the waters. It was about doing things God's way. He wanted Elisha to come out and heal him on the spot. That was Naaman's way, the way that kept him as the center of attention, right? We sometimes have this kind of relationship with God, don't we? One in which we think God is here for us and to do things the way we want Him to. Sometimes that's reflected in how we pray. It's even how we worship sometimes, and it's certainly revealed in how we live sometimes, isn't it? Oftentimes we don't even think about God until we need Him and then expect Him to prove Himself right away anyway. Naaman wanted Elisha to do something for him that was instantaneous with everybody watching. Elisha gave Naaman instructions, but Naaman just wanted to pay the man, get healed, become an even greater hero to his men, and go home to a higher status. But God wasn't looking to be appeased by Naaman's wealth in order to bless him. He doesn't need our wealth. God is wanting us to give ourselves to Him completely, and that involves humility and faith. Naaman wanted a show. God wanted him. Verse 13, "Then his servants came near and spoke to him and said, 'My father, had the prophet told you to do some great thing, would you have not done it? How much more then when he says to you, wash and be clean?'" This was bold by his servants. They pointed out his arrogance to him. They didn't call him that necessarily, but that's what they're saying. And encouraged him to see that what was asked of him was not much and might be worth it. Try it. You'll like it. At least like the results. Verse 14, "So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean." His serious desperation finally won out over his arrogance, which led to obedience and healing. He did it 7 times, which was in complete obedience to what the word had said from Elisha, from God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. I just want to take a side note from there too. This man was a valiant warrior. How many scars do you think he had? Guess what? He didn't have any more. That's what the Lord does for us spiritually when we are saved. He can heal all of our spiritual scars, all of our emotional scars. He'll leave the physical ones. One day, those will be taken care of too. We already talked about this young girl having the faith of a child. When we start over, we are born again. Like a child, we become a child of God. And like Naaman's flesh is made clean here, our slate is made clean. Our sin is washed away. And all the scars of struggle and difficulty and pain we have endured trying to get to God because we couldn't get to God on, when we finally surrender and humble ourselves like Naaman surrenders and humbles himself to the work of God in his life and to the Word of God being spoken to him, his eyes are opened. He fought it at first. Didn't you? I know I did. But here's the real healing, verse 15. When he returned to the man of God with all his company and came and stood before him, he said, Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So please take a present from your servant now. This is the spectacular result. A declaration of exclusive faith in God. He didn't just add Yahweh to Naaman. He kicked Naaman to the curb. And he said, all the earth, any other gods, they're nothing. There's only one. Your God, Yahweh. And then he offered an offering. Please take a present from your servant. But Elisha refuses the offering. Prophets didn't receive offerings. The priests did. Elisha also didn't want to take the glory from God. Elisha didn't heal him. Elisha just spoke the word that God had him speak. God healed him. Give yourself to God. Don't give your riches to me. Verse 16, but he said, As the Lord lives, before whom I will take nothing. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Naaman said, verse 17, If not, please let your servant at least be given 2 mules' load of earth, for your servant will no longer offer burnt offering, nor will he sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. In this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant. I'm not going to read this verse anymore. What he's saying is, there's going to be times, Elisha, when King Ben-Hadad is going to insist that I go because I'm his right-hand captain, I am his main warrior. He is going to make me go to the temple of Naaman with him to bow and worship. Unless I quit my job, I have to go. Now, what he asks for is to be able to take some dirt from right there in Israel so that when he has to bow that knee, he can throw that dirt on the ground and put his knee on that dirt. Now, that sounds strange to us, doesn't it? What it allowed him to do, in his mind at least, was to secretly worship Yahweh and not worship Naaman. But in that day, it was thought that a deity could only be worshipped if you were on the soil of that God's nation. Did you notice back up in verse 15, he said, There is no God in all the earth but in Israel. He's not seeing that this God of Israel is in all the earth. He's still confining him to the location of Israel. He's Israel's God. That's where he works at. He doesn't work anywhere else. And so I got to take some dirt there, because what they believed was if you were on the soil of that God's nation, you could worship that God. And so Naaman wanted to be able to be on Israeli soil while at home. And he asks in advance for God's pardon when he has to do what he is obligated to do to the king. Now, we would say what the New Testament says, it's better to obey God than to obey man. And I get that. Naaman is not there yet. I mean, he's just come to see Yahweh as the one and only God. He has lack of maturity, and he has this obligation. And so Elisha says to him, Go in peace. So he departed from him some distance. Now, Elisha offered a blessing as a response to Naaman. It doesn't necessarily absolve Naaman for entering the temple of Naaman. It may. We don't know. You could read between the lines and maybe get that, but you would have to read between the lines to fully get that. Perhaps he's just leaving it up to Naaman's conscience based on his new relationship with Yahweh. That maybe at some point you'll come to realize you got to step away from that entirely. Naaman was on the outside looking in. His arrogance kept him there despite his desperation to be healed. When he humbled himself before the Lord, God healed him. Naaman came to exclusively believe in Yahweh, and even accepted that Naaman, even though he was still going to go to the temple, was a false god. He placed his faith in Yahweh and was brought into the kingdom. And in case you are tempted to doubt his faith, we're now going to go to Luke chapter 4. Let's turn to Luke chapter 4. Verse 17. Luke chapter 4, verses 17 through 30. Jesus is going to use Naaman as an example very briefly at near the very end of what I'm going to read, but I need to read it all in order to set up the context of what is being said here, why he says this. Jesus is in Galilee, and he's in Nazareth, and he is speaking to the people from his hometown. And we're told, starting verse 17, and the book of the prophet Isaiah was handed him, and he opened the book and found the place where it was written, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord. And he closed the book, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. Meaning here in this room. And all were speaking well of him and wondering at the gracious words which were falling from his lips. And they were saying, is this not Joseph's son? Because he's from Nazareth. And he said to them, no doubt you will quote this proverb to me, physician, heal yourself. Whatever we heard was done at Capernaum, do here in your hometown as well. And he said, truly I say to you, no prophet is welcome in his hometown. So he's prophesying. He's prophesying that they were about to reject him, which they were about to do. But I say to you in truth, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the sky was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and when a great famine came over all the land, and yet Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow, in other words, a Gentile. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. And all the people in the synagogue were filled with rage as they heard these things. And they got up and drove him out of the city and led him to the brow of the hill on which their city had been built, in order to throw him down the cliff. But passing through their midst, he went his way. What Jesus has just done in his own hometown is taken a passage and declared himself to be the fulfillment of it, to be the Messiah. They can only see him as Joseph's son. Can't seem to get past that. They're hesitant to accept him. Jesus prophesies their rejection because they're going to want to see him do great miracles without having humbled themselves and worship him. Much like Naaman wanted a great miracle without having humbled himself and worship the God of Israel. He just wanted Elisha to do it. Jesus recalls 2 instances, including Naaman, in which God blessed Gentiles while withholding the same blessing from his own people because of the way they were walking. What Jesus said angered the people so much that they sought to kill him. In contrast, Naaman finally humbled himself and received the blessing of healing. Naaman was brought into the kingdom as evidenced by Jesus using him as an example of faith that led to blessing. You can parse it any way you want. You can talk about it any way you want. But if Jesus used it as an example, he's not using somebody that wasn't brought from the outside to the end. There was a reason he was willing to heal Naaman at this point. Because he wanted to show that Naaman could humble himself and be healed like the Israelites needed to do. And weren't willing. And Jesus used it here saying, I'm going to come and I'm going to proclaim release to the captives. I'm going to recovery of sight to the blind. We'll see that the oppressed are set free and proclaim the favorable year of the Lord, but you're not going to take it. You're not going to like it. much like the people back then didn't like it, and so God had to heal someone like Naaman to show his power and show their need to repent. This is a statement about the kingdom of God being for all people. This whole series has been, who are willing to humble themselves under the mighty hand of God and put away their idols and seek Him with their whole heart and submit to Jesus Christ. Naaman was so desperate he healed that he gave himself away. The people of Nazareth were not willing to do that. Because of the rejection by the Jews, the gospel would eventually go to the Gentiles, and it has. That's why we're here today. Which kind of makes the story of Naaman prophetic. What we've seen in this series, that even people from the Old Testament who had great sin and were low in status, or people of great sin and high in status, can all be part of God's kingdom through faith in the Messiah to come. No matter who you are, if you humble yourself before God, confess yourself to be a sinner, and call upon Jesus as Savior and Lord, He has promised in His Word that through His blood you will be saved. Now, I'm looking around this morning, and if you haven't done that, then I encourage you to do that. But if you have, I want you to understand, you're called to offer what Elisha offered to Naaman. A way to healing. And Jesus here in Luke 4 just revealed Himself to be that way. We are here and still on this earth for one reason, and one reason only. To be Jesus in a world that desperately needs Him. To be Jesus to people who are on the outside looking in. Not to be content that we've been brought in. I'm on the inside, praise God, I'll go to heaven someday, that's it. No. To be Jesus to people that don't know Him. So I encourage you. I continue to encourage you to be that. It's the only reason you're still here. It's your purpose. It's your calling. It's not my calling for you. It's your personal calling to the people God has put in your life. Tell them about Jesus. Show them Jesus. Be Jesus to them. Let's pray. Father, I thank you and praise you so much for your wondrous love for us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Lord, there is no excuse for the sin that's in our life, but there is forgiveness through Christ, and we thank you for that. We thank you for your grace, and we thank you for your mercy poured out upon us, and I don't know why. I don't know why I'm a part of this. You do, and you alone know why you showed it to me and revealed yourself to me and called me to yourself. God, I just thank you that you opened my eyes one day and helped me to see my desperate situation. Thank you for healing me, and thank you for those here who have been healed by the blood of Jesus Christ, made new, transformed into a child of God. Lord, help us to have a heart of desperation for those around us, that even if they're not yet desperate, we can show a desperation for them on their behalf, that we will go to them and proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ. Share our lives with them, that they might see Jesus in us. So, Lord God, help us to be light in darkness, the salt of the earth that you've called us to be. And we thank you for teaching us this, calling us to it. We humble ourselves before you now, seeking to walk in obedience. Show us the way. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.